Behind the heavy doors of 18th-century Masonic lodges, music was born that still resonates in concert halls around the world. But what do we hear when Mozart or Haydn is played? Only beautiful melodies or encrypted messages, understood only by the initiated. Freemasonry, a secret society that united the intellectual elite of its time, became for many composers not just a club of shared interests, but a source of inspiration and a philosophical platform. In an era when free thought was often persecuted, Masonic lodges offered a safe space for the exchange of ideas. Here, music transformed into a special language, capable of transmitting sacred knowledge through the harmony of sounds. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Joseph Haydn, two geniuses whose work is inextricably linked with Masonic traditions. The first, a proven member of the Brotherhood; the second, a probable adept whose involvement still sparks debate among historians. Their works are not just masterpieces of classical music, but also possible repositories of encrypted symbols, numbers, and allegories, reflecting the complex system of Masonic rituals and beliefs. The history of Freemasonry begins in the misty Middle Ages, when guilds of stonemasons kept the secrets of their craft. The builders of magnificent cathedrals possessed knowledge inaccessible to ordinary people: geometry, mathematics, architectural principles. They were united not only by professional secrets, but also by special rituals, symbols, and a system of identifying their own. Gradually, people who had no connection to construction began to be admitted into these closed communities, thus appeared accepted or speculative Masons. By the early 18th century, Freemasonry had finally transformed from a professional guild into an intellectual brotherhood. The first official Grand Lodge was founded in London in 1717, and soon Freemasonry spread throughout Europe. During the Age of Enlightenment, Masonic lodges became centers of progressive thought. Here, ideas of equality, liberty, and fraternity were discussed long before they resounded through the French Revolution. Inside the lodges, titles and social classes lost their meaning. An aristocrat and a talented craftsman could sit side by side, united by the desire for self-improvement. Freemasonry offered an alternative spirituality, free from the dogmas of the official church, yet not denying belief in a supreme being. This balance between religiosity and free thinking attracted many intellectuals of that era. For creative people, Freemasonry was particularly appealing. Its rich symbolism, allegories, and rituals provided food for the imagination. The philosophical system, combining the rational and the mystical, resonated with the dualism of art, balancing between form and content. Musicians found in Freemasonry not only a network of useful connections and patrons, but also a source of inspiration. This was especially true for composers, whose art by its nature is most abstract and symbolic. The Viennese musical scene was closely intertwined with Masonic circles. Here, in the atmosphere of Joseph II's enlightened absolutism, Masonic ideals found fertile ground, and music became the ideal means for their expression, a universal language capable of conveying complex ideas through harmony and rhythm. Vienna in the second half of the 18th century was an astonishing cultural melting pot, where art and secret societies existed in close symbiosis. The capital of the Habsburg Empire became one of the main centers of the Masonic movement in Central Europe. Several influential lodges operated here, among which Zur Wohltätigkeit, to charity, Zur wahren Eintracht, to true harmony, and Zur gekrönten Hoffnung, to crowned hope, particularly stood out. Each had its own distinct character and attracted different circles of Viennese society. The lodge Zur wahren Eintracht, led by the mineralogist Ignaz von Born, was renowned for its intellectual orientation and drew scholars, writers, and musicians. This very lodge served as the prototype for the Society of Wise Men in Mozart's, quote, four in Viennese Masonic circles. One could encounter aristocrats and officials, doctors and lawyers, merchants and artists. These people, so diverse in origin and profession, became brothers within the lodge walls, united by common ideals. It is noteworthy that musicians constituted a significant part of the Masonic Brotherhood. This is not surprising. The very structure of classical music, with its mathematical precision, harmony, and order, reflected the Masonic view of the universe's arrangement. The Viennese classical school, with its pursuit of formal perfection, clarity, and harmony, perfectly aligned with Masonic ideas of beauty. The political atmosphere of Vienna at that time was ambiguous. Emperor Joseph II, himself sympathetic to Enlightenment ideas, carried out reforms in the spirit of enlightened absolutism. He granted his subjects certain freedoms, including religious tolerance and a softening of censorship. At the same time, the monarch was wary of Freemasonry. He recognized its right to exist but sought to keep it under control. In 1785, the emperor issued a decree limiting the number of Masonic lodges in each city to 3, and requiring lists of members to be provided to the authorities. These measures were aimed not so much at suppressing Freemasonry as at regulating it and preventing political conspiracies. Many Masons understood these restrictions, seeing them as a reasonable compromise. Vienna's Masonic lodges became centers of cultural life. Not only rituals and philosophical discussions took place here, but also music was performed, literary works were created, and scientific discoveries were discussed. Brother Masons patronized the arts, commissioned works from composers, and supported theatrical productions. For musicians, Masonic connections opened access to influential patrons and a wealthy audience. But it was not just about practical benefits. Masonic philosophy, with its search for light, truth, and perfection, deeply resonated with the aesthetics of classicism. The idea that through art, one could approach an understanding of divine order was close to both Masons and musicians. The music of the classical era, with its coherent form, logical development, and resolution of conflicts in harmony, embodied the Masonic ideal of transforming chaos into cosmos, darkness into light. Numerical symbolism, so important to Freemasonry, found natural expression in musical structure, based on mathematical proportions. The very idea of developing a musical theme as a path from simple to complex, from immature to perfect, echoed the Masonic concept of human spiritual growth. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's journey to the Masonic Brotherhood was not accidental. The roots of this union run deep into his childhood, when his father Leopold Mozart introduced the young genius to the ideas of the Enlightenment. Leopold himself, although he did not have documented membership in Masonic lodges, maintained close ties with prominent Salzburg Masons and shared many of their beliefs. During young Wolfgang's numerous concert tours across Europe, father and son met with influential Masons from various countries, which laid the foundation for the future composer's sympathy for the Brotherhood. In London, 12-year-old Mozart could observe the flourishing of English Freemasonry, and in Paris, he could encounter the French branch of the movement, distinguished by its particular free thinking. These early impressions undoubtedly shaped his worldview long before his official entry into a lodge. Moving to Vienna in 1781, Mozart found himself at the epicenter of Masonic activity. Among his friends and patrons were many Masonic brothers, including Baron Gottfried van Swieten, who opened up the world of Bach and Handel's music to Mozart, and Count August von Hatzfeld. It was through these connections that the composer became acquainted with Masonic ideals from within. It is noteworthy that even before his official entry into the Brotherhood, elements began to appear in Mozart's music that can be interpreted as a reflection of Masonic ideas. A special attention to symbolic tonalities, three-part structures, and themes of trial and transformation. On December 14, 1784, 28-year-old Mozart was admitted to the Viennese Lodge, to charity. The initiation ceremony, held in a mansion on Schullerstrasse, became a turning point in his life. The composer went through the traditional initiation ritual, which included a symbolic journey from darkness to light. This metaphor of spiritual transformation deeply touched Mozart and was subsequently reflected in his work. It is noteworthy that his entry into the Brotherhood coincided with one of the most prolific periods in the composer's life. Freemasonry provided Mozart not only a new circle of acquaintances and patrons, but also a powerful source of inspiration. He quickly advanced through the Masonic hierarchy and within a few months was raised to the 2nd degree, and soon reached the highest, 3rd degree, Master Mason. Such a rapid ascent testified both to his devotion to the ideals of the Brotherhood and to the recognition of his exceptional talents and moral qualities by his Masonic brothers. When, in 1785, Emperor Joseph II issued a decree on the reform of Freemasonry, many lodges were forced to unite. Thus, Mozart became a member of the United Lodge Zur Neugekronten Hoffnung, to the newly crowned Hope, where he met an even wider circle of like-minded individuals. Unlike Mozart, whose membership in a Masonic lodge is historically documented, Joseph Haydn's connection to the secret fraternity remains one of the intriguing enigmas of musical history. Despite the absence of direct evidence of his formal initiation, a multitude of circumstantial clues points to the composer's profound familiarity with Masonic ideals and symbolism. A pivotal role in this story is played by Haydn's relationship with his chief patron, Prince Nikolaus Esterházy, who was a well-known Freemason. 30 years spent by Haydn at the Esterházy court provided the composer with a unique opportunity to immerse himself in an atmosphere permeated with Masonic ideas. The prince's lavish palace in Fairtude often served as a meeting place for influential Masonic brethren, and it is difficult to imagine that Haydn, being a trusted confidant of the prince, remained unaware of these gatherings. Haydn's social circle also speaks to his proximity to Masonic circles. Among his close friends were prominent Freemasons: Baron Gottfried von Swieten, Prince Lichnowsky, Count Apponyi. Particularly telling is his friendship with Mozart, which blossomed precisely during the latter's active involvement in the Masonic movement. During his London journeys in the 1790s, Haydn established close contacts with English Freemasons. It is known that he attended concerts organized by London lodges and was personally acquainted with several high-ranking British Freemasons. Elements echoing Masonic symbolism can be found in Haydn's music. His late symphonies and quartets demonstrate a particular attention to numerical symbolism, so important to Freemasonry. The use of three-part structures, symbolic tonalities, especially E-flat major, specific rhythmic figures. All of this can be interpreted as a reflection of Masonic ideas. In Masonic teachings, numbers were never merely mathematical abstractions. They carried deep symbolic meaning, reflecting fundamental principles of the universe. This numerical mysticism found astonishing embodiment in the music of Mozart and Haydn, transforming their works into sounding mathematical formulas with encrypted meaning. The number 3, sacred in Masonry, symbolized the trinity of the world, 3 degrees of initiation, 3 pillars of the lodge. In music, it manifested through 3-part forms, triads as the basis of harmony, and triple repetitions of musical phrases. Mozart masterfully used this symbolism, especially in his Masonic works. The Magic Flute is literally built on triplicity, from the 3 chords in the overture to the 3 trials of the main character. The number 5 in Masonry was associated with the 5-pointed star, the pentagram, a symbol of man and the 5 elements of nature. In musical structure, it was embodied through 5-part forms, quintal harmonic progressions, and groups of 5 variations. 7. The number of celestial perfection, 7 planets, 7 arts, also frequently appears in the structure of both composers' works. Haydn's symphonies often contain 7-part developments, and his 7 Last Words of Christ directly addresses this number. 9. 3 times 3, a symbol of completeness, often determined the total number of movements in cyclical works or the number of variations. Key signatures held special significance in Masonic symbolism. E-flat major, with 3 flats, was considered the Masonic key signature par excellence and was frequently used by Mozart for works with Masonic undertones. The contrast between key signatures with flats and sharps symbolized the opposition of darkness and light, ignorance and enlightenment. Rhythmic patterns also carried encoded messages. The famous knocking rhythm, 3 short beats followed by 1 long one, reproduced the Masonic knock on the lodge door. It appears in many of Mozart's works, from the Magic Flute to his last compositions. The mathematical proportion of the golden ratio, revered by Masons as divine, often determined structural relationships in sonata forms. Climaxes frequently occurred precisely at the golden ratio point of the total duration of the work. The secret numerical code even permeated the number of instruments performing certain fragments and the number of measures in sections. Thus, musical form became a reflection of the Masonic understanding of the harmony of the universe, where each element has its place and meaning in the overall order. The Magic Flute, Mozart's last opera, completed 2 months before the composer's death, became a true Masonic testament, encrypted in musical images and plot twists. Collaboration with librettist Emanuel Schikaneder, also a fellow Mason, allowed for the creation of a work in which Masonic symbolism is most openly and multifacetedly expressed. On the surface, it is a magical fairy tale, but beneath it lies a deep philosophical message about humanity's journey from darkness to light, from ignorance to wisdom. The very structure of the opera reflects the Masonic path of initiation. The protagonist, Tamino, follows the classic path of a Masonic neophyte, from delusion through trials to enlightenment. 3 ladies, 3 boys, 3 temples, 3 trials. Triplicity permeates the entire opera, referencing the number 3, sacred to Masons. The overture begins with 3 solemn chords in E-flat major, a key that Masons considered special, containing 3 flats and symbolizing light and truth. These chords are followed by a fugue, a musical form embodying the Masonic ideal of unity in diversity. The juxtaposition of the Queen of the Night and Sarastro reflects the Masonic dichotomy of darkness and light, feminine and masculine principles. It is noteworthy that Sarastro, the guardian of wisdom and light, heads the Temple of the Sun, a direct allusion to the Grand Master of a Masonic lodge. His aria, O Isis and Osiris, contains direct references to Egyptian mysteries, which Masons considered the source of their rituals. The trials of Tamino and Papageno, by fire, water, and silence, correspond to Masonic elemental trials. Tamino overcomes them with the help of the magic flute, symbolizing harmony and the spiritual power of music, which helps to overcome the chaos of the material world. Papageno, not ready for spiritual ascent, almost fails the trials, but nevertheless finds happiness at his own, more earthly level. The chorus of priests sings about virtue and justice, key Masonic values. Their musical parts are written in a strict choral style, reminiscent of church music, but filled with new, enlightenment-oriented content. Even the comic moments of the opera carry a Masonic subtext. Papageno, with his simplicity and earthly desires, symbolizes the uninitiated person who is not yet ready for higher knowledge, but is worthy of happiness at his level of development. In the Masonic tradition, death was never considered an end, merely a transition to a new form of being. This philosophy found profound reflection in Mozart's mournful works, especially in his famous quote, K477, composed in the year 1785. The composer created it for the memorial ceremony of two Masonic brothers, Duke Georg August of Mecklenburg-Strelitz and Count Franz Esterházy. The piece became a musical embodiment of the Masonic understanding of death as a necessary part of the eternal cycle of transformation. Funeral rituals in Freemasonry held special significance. They symbolized not only bidding farewell to the departed brother, but also reminding the living of the inevitability of their own death and the necessity of spiritual perfection. During such ceremonies, the lodge was plunged into twilight, symbolizing the dusk between life and death, and then gradually filled with light, a metaphor for spiritual rebirth. Mozart's Masonic funeral music remarkably accurately reflects this transformation. Beginning in a somber C minor, it gradually moves towards enlightenment, though it does not fully transition into a major key. This is a musical embodiment of the Masonic idea that death is not absolute darkness, but a transition to a new light. The choice of C minor is not accidental. In Masonic symbolism, it was associated with funeral rites. At the same time, Mozart masterfully uses counterpoint, a technique in which several melodic lines sound simultaneously, maintaining their independence. This is a musical embodiment of Masonic brotherhood, where each voice is individual, but together they create a harmonious whole. The instrumental composition of the work is also filled with symbolism. The unusual combination of clarinets, basset horns, oboes, French horns, and bassoons creates a deep, rich timbre, reminiscent of the sound of an organ in a church. Particularly noteworthy is the use of basset horns, instruments with a dark, velvety sound, which in Masonic lodges were often associated with the transition between worlds. Other Masonic elements can also be found in the work's structure. The three-part structure reflects the 3 degrees of Masonic initiation. Rhythmic figures are often organized in groups of 3 or 7, numbers that held special significance in Masonic numerology. The middle section of the work is particularly interesting, where Mozart quotes an ancient Catholic funeral song. This is not just a tribute to tradition. In Freemasonry, such an appeal to ancient sources symbolized a connection to ancient wisdom. It is noteworthy that despite all its mournfulness, Mozart's music is devoid of despair. Even in the darkest fragments, a light of hope shines through, a musical embodiment of the Masonic belief in the immortality of the soul and eternal life. This feature distinguishes Masonic funeral music from traditional requiems of that time. Mozart wrote several works for Masonic funeral ceremonies, but it is precisely Masonic funeral music, K477, that is considered the pinnacle of this genre. In it, the composer achieved an ideal balance between emotional depth and philosophical content, between sorrow for the loss of a brother and faith in his spiritual continuation. Joseph Haydn's late symphonies are a true treasure trove of musical enigmas. Particularly noteworthy are his, quote, composed during 2 trips to England in the 1790s. It was during this period that Haydn actively interacted with British Freemasons, who significantly influenced his work. England at that time was a true center of the Masonic movement, and the composer could not remain aloof from this intellectual current. Symphony No. 103, known as 1, begins with a mysterious, fragmented sound, a rhythmic pattern strikingly reminiscent of the Masonic. This triple knock, followed by an accent, is a characteristic sonic symbol, understandable to every initiate. The choice of E-flat major for many late symphonies is also not accidental. This key with 3 flats was considered in Freemasonry a symbol of light and enlightenment. Symphony No. 94 contains a sudden loud chord in the second movement, which can be interpreted as a musical embodiment of the Masonic idea of the neophyte. In Symphony No. 101, Haydn uses ticking as a metaphor for the passage of time, a concept of particular significance in Masonic rituals, where clocks symbolized the fleetingness of life and the necessity of wisely using allotted time. The structure of the finales of the London symphonies is particularly interesting. Haydn often employs sonata rondo form, where the main theme returns 3 times. Again, a reference to the number 3, sacred to Masons. Also noteworthy is the composer's use of folk melodies. In Freemasonry, an appeal to folk origins was considered a way to approach natural wisdom. Even the instrumentation of Haydn's late symphonies contains Masonic elements. Special attention to wind instruments, especially flutes and French horns, echoes their ritual use in Masonic ceremonies. In the quote 7, number 7, 100. Turkish percussion instruments can be interpreted as a reference to the Eastern roots of Freemasonry, which the brethren of that time actively explored. Numerical symbolism permeates all aspects of the London symphonies, from the number of movements to the proportions within individual sections. Particularly indicative is the use of the golden ratio, the divine proportion, highly valued by Masons. Analysis shows that key moments of development often fall precisely on the golden ratio points of the total duration of the work. Unlike the explicit Masonic elements in Mozart's music, Haydn preferred more subtle, veiled symbols. His musical messages require careful reading and knowledge of the context. This is a peculiar game with the enlightened listener, capable of recognizing hidden meanings behind the outward simplicity and clarity of the classical style. The chamber music of Mozart and Haydn is not merely elegant miniatures for small ensembles. In these works, Masonic ideals found perhaps their purest and most perfect embodiment. The string quartet, 4 equal instruments engaged in a continuous musical dialogue, became an ideal metaphor for the Masonic Brotherhood in miniature. Just as each brother in the lodge has a voice, in the quartet each instrument possesses individuality but submits to the overall harmony. Haydn, often called the father of the string quartet, elevated this genre to the highest level of perfection. In his 68 quartets, one can trace the evolution from simple divertimentos to complex philosophical statements. Particularly indicative are his Russian quartets, Opus 33, where the principle of equality of voices reaches true mastery. The first violin no longer dominates absolutely. melodic lines freely pass from instrument to instrument, creating an ideal balance of individual and collective. This is the musical embodiment of the Masonic principle of freedom in unity. Mozart, inspired by Haydn's quartets, created his masterpieces in this genre. The famous quote 3, dedicated to Haydn, demonstrate astonishing skill in creating musical discourse. In them, one can hear how four voices argue, agree, and complement each other, precisely like Masonic brothers during ritual meetings. It is remarkable that the structure of the quartet cycle often reflects the Masonic path of initiation, from initial search through trials to the attainment of harmony. The sonata form, which both composers brought to perfection, also has parallels with the Masonic worldview. The exposition with two contrasting themes symbolizes the dualism of the world: light and darkness, good and evil. The development, where themes undergo transformations and trials, corresponds to the Masonic trials of the neophyte. The recapitulation, where contradictions are resolved in a single tonality, embodies the Masonic ideal of achieving higher harmony. Even the choice of tonalities in chamber music carried symbolic weight. Mozart often used E-flat major, a tonality with 3 flats, sacred to Masons. His C major quartet, known as the quote 4, begins with an enigmatic chromatic introduction, reminiscent of the neophyte's journey through darkness to light. In the chamber music of both composers, rhythmic and melodic figures with Masonic significance are often found. Triple repetitions, pauses at significant points, special chord progressions, all this created an additional layer of meaning, understandable to the initiated. These works can be listened to simply as beautiful music, but for Masonic brothers, they contained hidden messages, just as Masonic symbols had a dual meaning, overt for the uninitiated and esoteric for members of the Brotherhood. In Masonic teaching, music was never regarded as a mere sequence of sounds. The choice of key for a composer Mason was akin to an alchemist's choice of color. Each held its own esoteric meaning, vibration, and energetic essence. Keys with flats and sharps formed two opposing camps in the musical universe, reflecting the dualism of the Masonic worldview. A special place in this system was occupied by E-flat major, a key with 3 flats, a sacred number for Masons. Mozart used it for his most significant Masonic works, including the overture to quote 0, quote, and quote 1, quote. This key was considered the embodiment of light, harmony, and enlightenment. Its antagonist was C minor, a key of sorrow and darkness, often used to depict trials on the path to light. Modulations, transitions from one key to another, became the musical equivalent of alchemical transformations. Just as an alchemist sought to turn lead into gold, a composer Mason transformed a minor theme into a major one, symbolizing spiritual transformation. In some Viennese Masonic lodges, particularly in double quote 2, parallels between musical and alchemical processes were studied. In Mozart's C minor sonata, K457, we observe an impressive example of such a transformation. The somber, tense main theme, gradually through a series of tonal transformations, finds resolution in the major. A musical metaphor for the journey from darkness to light, so crucial in Masonic philosophy. Haydn, though more subtly, used similar symbolism in his late sonatas and symphonies. His mastery of modulations, especially in the developments of sonata form, created a sense of journey through various states of consciousness, akin to a Masonic neophyte's journey through trials to enlightenment. Each key had its own character, its own temperature, color, and even correspondence to a specific planet in the astrological system studied by some Masonic lodges. D major was associated with triumph and glory, G minor with melancholy and contemplation, A major with purity and innocence. The music of Masonic rituals is a special genre created specifically to accompany the Brotherhood's mysteries. In these works, Mozart and Haydn embodied not only aesthetic but also functional elements necessary for conducting ceremonies. They became the sound design of sacred space and time, helping the brethren tune into an elevated mood and emphasizing key moments of the rituals. Mozart created several works exclusively for Masonic gatherings. The cantata, (0), K471, (1), K477, the cantata, (2), K623. These compositions were performed during the initiation of new members, the celebration of Masonic holidays, or mourning ceremonies. Ritual music had a number of distinctive features that made it recognizable to the initiated. One of the most characteristic features is special rhythmic figures that imitate the hammer blows of the lodge master. 3 short beats followed by 1 long one. This pattern appears in many of Mozart's works, from the Magic Flute to sonatas and symphonies. Solemn fanfares of brass instruments were used as musical calls, signals for the beginning of certain actions or the designation of a transition to a new part of the ceremony. In Masonic music, specially measured pauses are often found, moments of silence intended for pronouncing ritual formulas or performing certain actions. Composers precisely calculated the duration of these pauses to ensure the smooth flow of the ceremony. The influence of Mozart's and Haydn's Masonic musical tradition did not end with their passing. Like a secret flame, it was passed down from generation to generation, finding reflection in the works of many outstanding composers. Ludwig van Beethoven became the most obvious successor to Masonic musical ideas. Although there is no documentary evidence of his lodge membership, many researchers note characteristic Masonic elements in his music. The Ninth Symphony, with its Ode to Joy, based on the poem by Schiller, also a Mason, embodies the ideal of universal brotherhood, a central principle of Masonic philosophy. The Piano Sonata Opus 111, with its transcendent final variation, demonstrates the same journey from darkness to light that we see in Mozart's Masonic works. Franz Liszt, initiated into Freemasonry in 1841, continued this tradition in his philosophical symphonic poems. In them, he often turned to Masonic ideals of humanism and spiritual transformation. His "One," with its trajectory from doubt to enlightenment, reflects the Masonic path of initiation. It is interesting to trace how the performance interpretation of Mozart's and Haydn's works changed over the centuries. In the 19th century, when Freemasonry was at its peak of popularity, many conductors and performers were themselves members of the Brotherhood and well understood the hidden symbolism of this music. They emphasized special rhythmic figures, highlighted significant pauses, and gave special meaning to those musical fragments that contained Masonic codes. By the mid-20th century, this tradition was largely lost. Performers began to perceive Mozart's and Haydn's works primarily from an aesthetic point of view, missing their esoteric subtext. Rhythmic figures that had ritual significance simply became interesting musical techniques. Only a few conductors, such as Otto Klemperer and Bruno Walter, both interested in esotericism, retained an understanding of this deeper meaning. In recent decades, there has been a resurgence of interest in the Masonic context of classical music. Performers practicing a historically informed approach are rediscovering for themselves and for audiences this hidden side of familiar works. conductors like John Elliott Gardner or Renee Jacobs strive to recreate not only the sound, but also the semantic context of this music. This trend is particularly noticeable in modern productions of The Magic Flute, where directors increasingly emphasize the Masonic symbolism of the opera rather than just its fairy tale plot. The world of Masonic music, which we explored in previous sections, has given rise to many myths and conspiracy theories. It's time to separate fact from fiction and take a critical look at popular notions of secret messages in the works of Mozart and Haydn. One of the most common legends concerns Mozart's death. Many conspiracy theorists claim that the composer was poisoned by Masons for revealing the Brotherhood's secrets in historical facts, however, do not support this version. Masons highly valued Mozart, and the opera, although it contained elements of rituals, did not reveal anything that would be considered an unforgivable breach of oath. Medical studies indicate that Mozart most likely died of acute rheumatic fever, a disease common in that era. Another popular myth is the idea that every work by Mozart and Haydn contains encrypted Masonic messages. This is a classic case of overinterpretation. Although some of their compositions do include Masonic symbolism, most works were created for the general public and did not carry an esoteric subtext. When researching alleged Masonic elements in music, we encounter a serious methodological problem: apophenia, the tendency to see patterns where there are none. The three-part form. The use of certain keys or rhythmic figures can be explained by purely musical considerations, without resorting to Masonic symbolism. How to distinguish actual Masonic elements from accidental coincidences? Several criteria can be proposed. First, historical context. A work created specifically for a Masonic lodge is more likely to contain relevant symbolism. Second, the concentration of alleged symbols. A single appearance of the number 3 is not yet proof, but the systematic use of Masonic numbers, rhythms, and keys already deserves attention. Third, the presence of documentary evidence. Letters, diaries, contemporary memoirs can confirm the composer's intentions. The myth of the confrontation between Masons and the Church also requires adjustment. Many Masons of the 18th century, including Mozart, were sincerely devout Catholics. Freemasonry of that time did not oppose religion, but offered an additional path of spiritual development. Therefore, religious motifs in the music of Mozart and Haydn could harmoniously combine with Masonic ideas. Modern researchers are sometimes prone to project today's ideas about Freemasonry onto the past. It is important to remember that in the 18th century, this movement was different, less unified, more integrated into social life and culture. For Mozart and Haydn, Freemasonry was not so much a secret society as an intellectual and spiritual brotherhood. Another common myth is the notion that Masonic music can only be understood by initiates. Although some symbols were indeed addressed to fellow Masons, great composers created works that operate on several levels of perception. Even without knowing about the Masonic subtext, a listener can fully enjoy the beauty and emotional depth of this music. Instead of looking for a secret code in every note, it is worth recognizing that the genius of Mozart and Haydn goes beyond any interpretations. Their music, inspired by Masonic ideals of harmony and light, continues to speak to us across centuries, and this is the main miracle that requires no conspiratorial explanations. The music of the great Freemasons continues to resonate in the modern world, acquiring new meanings and interpretations. 250 years later, the works of Mozart and Haydn are performed more often than ever. But do we perceive them as the authors intended? understanding the Masonic context radically changes our perception of this music. When a conductor, familiar with Masonic symbolism, emphasizes triple repetitions or highlights significant pauses, the listener, even if uninitiated into the Brotherhood's secrets, intuitively senses the hidden depth of the work. In recent decades, there has been a resurgence of interest in authentic performance of classical music. Conductors and musicians practicing a historically informed approach are rediscovering the Masonic subtext of familiar works. Modern productions of "Zero" increasingly emphasize not only the fairy tale plot, but also the esoteric symbolism of the opera. Directors use Masonic iconography, recreate elements of rituals, and visualize the protagonist's path of initiation. Masonic musical codes have also penetrated modern popular culture. Film composers regularly quote fragments of Mozart's Masonic works in the soundtracks for films about secret societies and ancient mysteries. Triple repetitions, characteristic rhythmic figures, and specific tonalities have become peculiar sound symbols, signaling to the viewer the hidden, esoteric subtext of what is happening on screen. Even in popular music, echoes of Masonic symbolism can be found, from progressive rock of the 70s to modern electronic music. The albums of some groups are structured as a musical journey from darkness to light, reproducing the structure of Masonic initiation. Musicians interested in esotericism consciously incorporate elements referencing the Masonic tradition into their works. In the age of digital technologies, Masonic music finds new life. The internet allows music lovers worldwide to exchange information about hidden codes in the works of Mozart and Haydn. Interactive projects emerge, visualizing numerical symbolism in their compositions. Mobile applications help identify Masonic elements when listening to classical music. Masonic music is becoming the subject of interdisciplinary research, uniting musicologists, historians, and specialists in esoteric teachings. Modern analytical methods, including computer modeling, allow for the discovery of patterns that previously eluded researchers. Statistical analysis confirms the non-random nature of the use of certain numbers, rhythms, and tonalities in the works of Masonic composers. Of particular interest is the study of the acoustic properties of Masonic music. Some researchers hypothesize that certain tonalities and harmonic sequences used by Mozart and Haydn may have a special psychological and even physiological effect on the listener. Modern neurobiological studies confirm that music can indeed alter states of consciousness, which resonates with the goals of Masonic rituals. The Masonic musical tradition of Mozart and Haydn remains a living cultural heritage, continuing to influence contemporary art. It is not a museum exhibit, but a dynamic tradition capable of speaking to each new generation in a language it understands. The universal values embedded in this music, the pursuit of light, harmony, and brotherhood, remain relevant in the 21st century. Our journey into the world of Masonic music is nearing its end, but the exploration of this topic is far from conclusive. Each new generation will find new meanings in the works of Mozart and Haydn, consonant with their era. Perhaps this is the main Masonic message of the great composers. Music, like true wisdom, is inexhaustible and constantly renewed in the perception of those who are ready to hear its hidden harmony.